and go ahead. All right, you can go ahead.
Hello, this is Amit Goswami.
Amit, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining the show. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
So your new book, sorry, that's my reminder of this interview. Quantum Activation, very, very informative about um, quantum physics and some of the definitions that go along with that. I truly learned a lot from it. And you co-write it, I guess, with two other authors. Um, what inspired this book?
It was all the way a joint effort, but Carl David Blake, he initiated the whole thing. I had a conversation with him. He was a filmmaker at the moment. He was trying to make a documentary film, and I encouraged him. But the conversation covered a lot more ground, and he was very inspired, I guess. So a month or two after that, or maybe a little bit later, he thought of the idea of, okay, he was connected with young people trying to face obstacles and how to find direction of life, that kind of thing. And so that conversation helped him to initiate this book.
Mm.
And then we recruited Gary because his subject is popular and it's also such a good case for quantum physics, both in terms of how it works, family constellation therapy, and also it's a very good example of how to get your obstacles out of the way so that you can live your life with your intentions coming true.
Your intentions coming true. So I'm learning a little bit more about that, right? Like I'm learning more about how to manifest things, right? Like or try to manifest things. Like I've read a lot of your stuff, and I've read Dr. Joe Dispenza's stuff, and um, learned a little bit about through your book, like the definition of epigenetics, and that's really interesting to me. It's like the unconscious consciousness of your cells, right? Um, can you explain, I guess, better than that, what exactly epigenetics is?
Well, epigenetics is a very new subject. It's telling us a very, very important thing. It's telling us that the genes are not everything that is there to know about who we are. Genes determine the physical hardware. This is the simplest way of putting it. But the software, the function that the hardware will perform, software, depends on which genes are turned on in each organ. The cells of one organ don't turn on the same genes as the cells of another organ because they have to make different proteins since they're performing different functions. So epigenetics is the big discovery that the software is not inside the genes. Genes have nothing to do with it. It's about turning on the genes or turning off the genes. So software comes from outside. And then there are models, people still try to make models within materialism, which of course, in my view, completely bound to fail because consciousness is important in how we work, how we operate, every living being operate. And therefore you have to assume that the software is non-physical. Movement of the software is what we experience as feelings. The most important thing, one of the most important thing, apart from thinking, in our totality of experience.
Mm.
So this legitimizes the epigenetic software, legitimizes our feelings, gives a scientific model for the feeling.
Mm. So, do you think, or do you believe, or do you kind of know, like, so if I want to manifest something, like let's say if I want to, because we experience our lives, linear, right? Like time, like right now. we can't see in the future, we can't see in the past, or we can see in the past, right? But we remember the past. Right now is the moment. Do you believe that when we meditate um, or really concentrate on where we want to go or what we want to do, we can manifest that? Do you think we can do that?
There is a way of doing it. Quantum physics does say very clearly, without any doubt about it, that um, objects are possibilities for consciousness to choose from. So indeed, our thoughts, feelings, and even archetypal intuitions, they all can be chosen if I know how to intend properly. Because it is I who choose it, except that I don't choose in my ordinary ego consciousness, which is a constricted consciousness, very me-centered, whereas the choice happens in a consciousness which we call non-local, kind of potential oneness of everything. So, or you can put it as an interconnection of everything. So in that connected consciousness, we choose. So the whole trick is how to get into the connective consciousness and manifest. So we make the intention in the ego because that's where we are when we make the intention. But there is a procedure we can follow. For example, we can, when we feel inspired, we are not connected for very long, but for that moment we are connected. Inspiration is specifically a connection that occurs. That's what inspires us. It's an expansion of consciousness. So in that expanded state, if we intend, that's better. And then if we learn to intend how to make my intention um, consonant with the movement of consciousness itself, because there are laws of consciousness that consciousness follows. Science, there is a science behind it. For example, consciousness, one of the conscious intentions is to manifest the archetypes in the world, in our being, in our software. So if I intend things that consciousness, movement of consciousness wants for humanity anyway, then my chance of fulfilling that intention becomes much better. So in this way, it is sort of in the old-fashioned way of saying, getting God on your side. Then we live in a society where a ordinary person, a middle-class person, really suffers from huge elitism, right? The elitists have it made. I mean, everything goes to them, either meritocracy or aristocracy, either way. It's always the huge hierarchy. The system is stacked against middle-class people. The middle-class people only are losing ground compared to what we had even 50 years ago. So the worldview polarization has a lot to do with it. In this environment, it is very important to recognize that if we act in a certain way, then this consciousness that we call a oneness, religious people call God, that consciousness can help us.
Hmm. Have you ever experienced the oneness? Have you ever experienced like altered states of consciousness where you got into that oneness?
Yes, I have had several, quite a few of these
Now,
experiences.
were they like, I don't know, what is it? Were they natural, like meditation, or were they kind of like the LSD, the MT kind of experiences?
LSD does not, in my judgment, but I have never taken LSD, but I have taken other drugs. Like I took a drug called ketamine, which is very conducive to produce LSD-like hallucinatory images. In my judgment, a material molecule, be it LSD, be it ketamine, be it MDMA, a material molecule cannot really give you any altered state of consciousness that will facilitate your personal growth or transformation. However, it does give you profundity of images, so creativity can flourish. We use those images to be creative. So often what we find that LSD indeed released a lot of creativity in people's part. And then the people who are smart, like, I don't know if you heard of Ramdas,
Hmm.
Richard Alpert, he went into spirituality and then his life flourished. So he became creative. He became interested in spirituality. So that I knew another guy whose name is John Lilly. I don't know if you have
Yep.
heard of
Yep.
him.
Yep.
Endocrinologist, great scientist. But he also used the LSD experience for being creative. He wrote books. He had ideas. He discovered the Lilly tank. That's the real method of getting an altered state, not LSD so much. Ah, okay.
I got his book right here. Yeah, it I'm more like I feel like I have the same kind of idea of that as you. Like I think that, that's great. This is, you can use different types of drugs like that, like the DMT and the LSD to kind of like get you and kind of hallucinate or whatever it is. I've never done that way. I've always tried to do the natural meditation, altered states of consciousness through running or something like that. Like I want to experience that oneness like naturally, just for me, right? Like I just want to feel it because I know that you can do it if you like and it's not about trying so much. It's about just kind of like putting yourself out there and just continually like just I don't being right, like just being here and present in the moment and trying to reach that hierarchy you were talking about, that oneness, that God. And people have, through meditation, experienced it at some level. But you've also said previously that when you feel inspired or motivated or that higher frequency, when you feel like you're doing the thing that you love, like you feel that heart vibration and you're connected to the oneness for a little bit. So that too is a type of meditation. Like for me, it's having this conversation with you, right? Like you are an inspiration to me. I believe a lot of your the material that's in your books. I believe in that, and I believe um, a lot has to do with, I don't know, like the universe and the electrons and everything like that. Like lining yourself up and just trying to create, well, we've already created our reality, but I mean like changing that, like using the power that is inside of us to ultimately build a future that inspires us, that fires us up, that aligns with our heart power, right? And I think, and I don't know yet because I'm working towards that, but I think and believe that we can do that.
I think you're in the right direction. In fact, I often prescribe that people be with teachers who can inspire because the teachers normally we use them for intellectual understanding, but except for intricate logic like mathematics, we don't really need teacher to understand things because that's the purpose of logic. It's built into the brain memory is logically built. So anyone who has a past a threshold of intelligence, I don't know very low intelligence people, but people that I meet, they all are beyond a threshold of intelligence. They can certainly process intellectual discourse. What teachers are needed for are for intricate technology, that kind of thing, intricate mathematics, that kind of thing, very technological stuff, or they need for inspiration. That inspiration is the job of the teacher to provide that excitement, to kindle the curiosity, passion. Those are the things. And for that, the teacher needs to be aware of the oneness, and teachers need to be aware of the feelings in the body. That is much easier to reach oneness. I mean, oneness is a mystery, Trey, until you find feelings. If you try to reach oneness with thinking, then you have to take a creative quantum leap or at least have experiences of frequent intuition. And that's very possible. But that requires a little bit of interest on the creative side of things. And some people do. The great scientists, artists, they all do. Um, but if you're not talking about specially talented people, then it's much better to proceed the way of relationship. Like if we try to love somebody, or even a teacher. That is a non-local relationship. When you say you are inspired by me, but I already have a non-local relationship, right?
Mhm.
And if you care to look at your heart, you'll find slight expansion. Now that is a touch of oneness, okay? And what is happening is that you have gone into what we call the brain's pre-conscious. There is quantum self-consciousness, very deep self. Well, ordinarily, we don't have experience of that. We experience things that develop the ego. But when we are inspired with someone or into a non-local relationship with anything living, you can have it while looking at a flower. The reason that I love water is looking at water can get you there easily because water has that fluidity,
Mhm.
which is very interesting. It resonates with us. So there are certain resonances. You can look at you are a man, you can look at a particular woman's face, and that will give you this resonance with an archetype, and that will produce this non-local relationship. This is how people fall in love.
Mm. Interesting. Now you talked about non-local consciousness, right? Like is that where I think it was like you described in the book, right? Like we have the ego self, right? Like that's where all of our memories are. And then the non-local consciousness, is that where all of man's memories are? Is that right?
Non-local consciousness is where the deep level of consciousness we become when we become connected. So you were wanting to experience non-locality. That's the experience of non-locality. That experience of the self, the I, that experiences the we, non-local. Everything is one. That I is quantum self. I of oneness is quantum self
Mm.
by definition.
Now, is all of quantum physics like this, or is it like something that you come across as you become a physicist or study in your career? Like when you started out, were you spiritual like you are now, or was it something that happened or something that you discovered along your way that kind of was a tipping point?
There are two kinds of quantum physics. Well, I mean it quite seriously. When we apply quantum physics to non-living objects, like I was a physicist, like I was trained to be a physicist. And physicists in those days that I was trained, like in the 50s, they were not materialist at the time. Physics was kind of open. We do everything. Their belief was that science applies to everything. That is the case. So with that belief, you don't exclude spirituality, you don't exclude religion. There will be some physics of religion at some point, physics of spirituality at some point. That was the belief that I had when I learned quantum physics in the 50s. However, since I had to go through physics in order to get a job in physics, it was also very clear that the deep questions of quantum physics will not teach me that. I have to learn to make a living. So my professor said, well, okay, when you become a full professor, maybe, but not now. Now you deal with how to use quantum physics to calculate movement of physical objects, material objects, elementary particles, nuclei. So this is the kind of thing that I did. And that went on for quite a while. I graduated in 1963, but that went on like, actually I graduated in 1964. 63 is when I finished my thesis. And until about 1976, 77, I was still seriously doing only physics of nuclei, physics of elementary particles, that kind of thing. And then I go to a conference and I was invited to give a talk. I should have been very pleased, and I was for just a few minutes. And then the next speaker spoke, and I thought he's speaking much better than I was. And I started feeling inferiority and jealousy. This jealousy kind of went on for the whole day and the evening, became overwhelming. So then I got disgusted with myself and went outside, and the ocean air hits me on the face, and the thought comes, why do I live this way? And I realized, came with the conviction that I don't need to, I don't have to. My job is to integrate my life and the means of my living, making livelihood. So thinking, living, livelihood, that integration is what led me to what I am today.
Oh, that's such a beautiful story. I mean, like, because everyone has experienced that, right? Like you talked about like that inferiority and jealousness. I mean, we all kind of do that, right? When we compare ourselves to other people's journeys, right? And I
Yeah,
mean, I
that is where the brain is built. Brain has this negative emotional circuits, and naturally, brain is built that way. So if a stimulus occurs, which are making me feel insecure, naturally that will express itself as jealousy, even envy. I give up the field entirely and choose something else because I won't be able to compete. All kinds of things can happen because of the brain's misbehavior.
yeah,
So
but
these are things that we have discovered. The book is mainly about what these obstacles are about. Like this, for me, the obstacle was my ambition, and I did not work at all on my feelings and emotions. So lack of emotional intelligence was a huge obstacle. Nowadays, people talk about emotional intelligence even more than intellectual intelligence. So that is a good thing. Unfortunately, the IT, information technology, has taken us away from feelings. So that is a bad thing. So in this kind of situation, in order to learn quantum activation, we really have to go through a kind of a training. You talked about meditation. I prescribe not only meditation in thinking, that is the usual form of meditation, but also meditation in terms of feeling. For example, the meditation we talked about in the beginning, you felt inspired by me, that's a meditation also, but it's a feeling meditation. It's a feeling on the heart. And that is much easier to manifest oneness this way, a relationship of non-locality this way, than any other way. So we really have kept, because the whole environment today is very much intellectual dominated, and that's partly because men are good at thinking. Women's brain is built in such a way that the amygdala connects to the left brain for women. That means they have to be aware of the negative emotions. For men, the amygdala is connected more to the right brain, and that's unconscious in us. So we can suppress negative emotions much more easily than women can. So women are good in relationships, but men are good in intellectual thinking. In this way, we have created a man-woman difference, which is good. That's the polarity that attracts us, men towards women, and vice versa. So we feel each other's lack. That part is good. The part that is bad is that for optimal function, we need both. We need both emotions and thinking. And so we all have to integrate to some extent emotion and thinking as much as we can. So IQ and EQ both are important.
mm,
And this is being emphasized more and more, I'm happy to say. And what is not being emphasized is the other thing that we attract a lot of attention in this book, namely creativity. Creativity is the way to manifest. So we not only have to develop IQ, EQ, but also then creative intelligence.
creative intelligence. I love it. Um, what about quantum physics and reincarnation? Like, are they related at all?
Yes, they're definitely related. Quantum physics has this concept of non-locality and the concept also of potentialities. Where is non-locality? Non-locality comes from our unconscious, the domain of potentiality. Okay, So this is the key of everything. The non-local domain of reality. We approach it through these potentialities, and reincarnation is very relevant because ordinary memory is local in the brain, but certain things in our experience, like what we learn or our capacity to learn, like you have a capacity of listening well. This is part of your character, because without it, you could not be what you are. That character part is a non-local memory. In other words, it's not, the episodes are how you learned it is in the brain, but the capacity that you have gathered from all that learning is stored in the domain of potentiality, in the non-local domain of reality. So this non-local memory is not restricted by space and time. So somebody in the future, after you die, somebody in the future can very well use your non-local memory. And that somebody is called your reincarnation. The one that is privileged to use a non-local memories that you generate in this life.
Hmm. How do you, like, I'm just learning about reincarnation, right? You live in India, and it's kind of been, I mean, that is, I mean, for you, it is kind of like it is a belief there. I mean, reincarnation has been, everything I read is coming out of, India, right? Have you grown up with that your entire life as far as a belief, or is that something that you learned about?
No, India was changing very rapidly and going towards materialism just like you. So what happened to me is that I lived a childhood which was very enchanted with all these kinds of spirituality, rituals, a lot of uh, I didn't go to school until I was in the 11th grade. So until I was 11 years old, 8th grade. So in that homeschooling, I had a lot of things that I read on my own, and I picked up things like reincarnation. However, then I became a scientist, and science was materialistic even then, although it was more open than today. Materialism was not yet a belief system, it was not a dogma. But still, uh, as I said, teachers always try to keep to the material domain and try the idea if material explanation works. And therefore, we all gave up uh, things that could not fit very well the material explanation. Like in this case, the difficult thing to overcome, difficult thing to understand is that brain dies and all our memories are in the brain. So how can we get past life memories to remember in the next life? The brain is gone. Our privilege of how do we recover a brain memory? Because we again and again reinforce that memory by recalling. Recall reinforces memory, but that's the brain. Without the brain, I don't have this reinforced memory anymore. We didn't have the concept of non-local memory. So I gave up. One idea that I immediately gave up was the reincarnation, because that just doesn't fit, you know. But then it was a big surprise how reincarnation came back to me. What happened was a theosophist started coming to take quantum physics lesson from me when my first book, Self-Aware Universe, was published. All of a sudden, he showed up, he even paid a fee to the university and started taking a reading class from me in physics, quantum physics. But of course, he was not interested really in quantum physics. He was interested in getting me into research on reincarnation, because he was a theosophist, and theosophists have this as in part of their belief system, so reincarnation. And then I saw a dream in which the dream admonition was, Tibetan Book of the Dead is correct, and it's your job to prove it. A Tibetan Book of the Dead is the typical Book of the Dead where a person dies and it describes a soul's journey through what Tibetans call bardos, passageways. So again, this reincarnation, that idea, because eventually the soul reincarnates going through these different doorways. So like that, the straw on the camel's back was when a woman from philosophy department, she was a graduate student there, she called and her boyfriend had died, and she wanted consolation from me. I said, I'm not a therapist. She says, but you were the only one who talks about such things. It thinks about such things. This is in the grapevine. I'm not going to stop until you see me. So I did see her, and she turned out to be very intelligent. So we talked about such things as channeling or mediumship. Does that make sense? And one day during my conversation with her, I had the breakthrough. So reincarnation took a lot of work to discover the basics of it on my part. But it was fun. Once I understood it, the basic concepts that the spiritual traditions in India proposed, those concepts are basically true, even in detail. So it's amazing how good these scientists of consciousness who were behind the what later became Hinduism, they really were not particularly religious. They were scientists of consciousness. And I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. I'm grateful as well. I mean, the one thing that's frustrating for me though, right? Like, so I'm going back to school. I want to get my degree. I want to do something in psychology. And it's like you're talking about like the behaviorist, the materialist kind of mindset that we have in the West is like, if you can't measure it, it doesn't, you can't explain it. You can't, why are you even like investigating it? Like it just, Hume's theory. It's just, it's frustrating because like, like I don't, like everything from the theory to, or from the hypothesis to the theory, right? It's always, the data supports it. It's never proven, right? Like that's how they look at things. And it's frustrating because like I see and read a lot of texts, like the mystical texts that you're talking about, and it makes sense to me. But the Western world is just so stuck on a natural event in the world is caused by another natural event. There can be no mysticism in that. It has to be measured or quantified. Like it's frustrating. Like, and you talk about you're a scientist. Like, does that you got to get frustrated with that, right?
I was, and then I realized the wisdom in the movement of consciousness. See, the same movement that have created you and me has also created the materialist scientist. So the important thing is to see why is this at once an obstruction, but at once is also an opportunity. So what they're saying, these materialists, is that, okay, eventually data is a good thing because it's a objective verification. Of course, they made the huge mistake. They dispensed with experience completely because they were doing physical things. We cannot experience those physical things of microscopic world.
Yeah.
And therefore, they did the right thing for the physical thing. For physics and chemistry, even to some extent biology, we cannot experience. And therefore, it's good to stop talking about experience for those fields. But in psychology, we cannot help experience. Even cognitive psychology, cognitive experience, they ultimately are based on experience. They always have to ask somebody who is actually getting doing the experiment. There is some moment of subjectivity. So this should change things. So we should realize that when we are talking about consciousness, experience is also important. But this is the thing. The surprising thing for everybody has been that eventually experiments caught up. I mean, I was so amazed when I discovered that neuroscientists have given us evidence that this non-local consciousness, this oneness self, quantum self, brain has a signature for it, and neuroscientists have discovered it already.
Hmm.
So, my view of entire enterprise just took a quantum leap when I found that. I mean, it's not only that science has been verifying meditation data with brain waves and all that, that was quite well known for quite a while, that yes, science can be useful, it can measure, we can measure certain things. But to have the very way that we are not only the ego, which is a very local thing in the brain, we are also a non-local thing. When whole brain starts dancing non-locally, different parts start moving synchronically. And that's an amazing finding, but that's what we find in the brain. Different parts, this fMRI,
Yeah.
functional magnetic resonance imaging. You take the image of the different parts of the brain, but you also measure the oxygenation of the different parts. What happens is that in the ego consciousness, only a little part, local part in the prefrontal cortex is involved. So we know this is our local consciousness. But when we are in this throw of creativity or this oneness experiences, or people who meditate a long time who kind of live in this oneness kind of experience, the brain shows that different parts of the brain are all moving in synchrony,
Mm.
which is the sign of non-locality. No other way you can produce synchrony between different parts at the same time, because neurons, the velocity is quite limited, and there will be time lag between, it's like a symphony orchestra. If you had to work with symphony orchestra with velocity of sound, you couldn't possibly do it. So what did they do? They put a button in the conductor's hand so that we can see, and speed of light is very large, so different parts can be synchronized. But in the brain, we don't have the advantage of speed of light propagation. The neurons have to move through nerve signals has to move through neurons. Speed is much, much less. So synchrony cannot be maintained. How can synchrony be? Non-locality, no signals. So this is an amazing finding.
That is, I gotta read up more on that because that is amazing. What? So I've also read in this book about remote viewing. Like, can you explain that? Like, I'm trying to wrap my mind around that. Isn't that where like you kind of? I'm trying to find it in here, but like remote viewing. Like, what is that? Like, is that just kind of like being in a different room and being able to see something that's covered up or something like that? Like, is that what is that?
When I'm feeling,
Yeah.
well, it's a vital energies. I see vital movement. That's what I become aware of. It's
Okay.
really becoming directly aware of. See, an instrument, physical instrument cannot feel because it's not alive. Only living things can feel because living things only have vitality, vital energies. And so I can communicate with living things directly through non-local communication using feelings. In other words, it is really possible to have a person with whom you are feeling interconnected as if your consciousness has expanded, right, to include the other. The proof of it is in the caring. All of a sudden you feel that I care for this person. What is the thought? This thought came about. It's not a thinking thought. It's like, it's a thought of vulnerability. It's like, I don't know if you cuddle after sex, but if you cuddle after sex, you'll get into that state very easily. This is the easiest way for people to experience this oneness.
Mm.
You have sex, wonderful orgasm, that part is the brain. But then if you don't go to sleep, because brain does give you a good dosage of serotonin, it's easy for men to fall asleep. They cannot be blamed for that. But if you do give in to your lady's wish and turn over and actually cuddle, you'll be absolutely surprised what happens.
Wow.
Consciousness expands. Where did that come from? It's coming because the vital energies rise from your sex chakra. That's where the epigenetics of sexuality is, to the epigenetics of the heart chakra, where love is. So all of a sudden, your consciousness expands. In that consciousness, you become vulnerable. This is why the independent-minded Iron Men, they don't like to cuddle. Dangerous. You become vulnerable. But those of us who are into experiencing love, we once we learn it, we never object to women wanting to cuddle.
I love that. You're a professor at a university. I feel like all of your classes get filled up fairly quickly just because of the topics you talk about on here. Like I feel like you're pretty popular over there.
Well, I did teach a course on quantum physics for a long time. The last 10 years of my career, teaching career at the university, yes, they were very filled up, yes.
Do you ever go into this, like, you know, the topics that we discussed today, like in your quantum physics class? Do you discuss them at all?
Okay, I would be very, um, I had to be super lucky to do it that fast. No, this understanding came over the years.
Mhm.
I mean, this is like in the 90s. This is like started about 1988 to 1997. And that was the period I very fondly remember it, but that was the basic stuff I was discovering. And as I was discovering, I was presenting it. So I did present something about love and something about oneness experience because I had that already, but I could not explain the intricacies of love that I know today because I not only have developed theory but also have experienced it, and I now can also cite experimental data now. So it's much more developed. So we have a new university. So what I've done is I have established a university of transformational education because this kind of thing traditional universities will not teach.
Sure.
We have to accept that. But we found a traditional university in India where they agreed that they will sponsor us. So we have become a department in a university in India, which is affiliated, and therefore people can get an affiliated degree in master's and PhD working with me and my associates, and very much of this kind of thing. We really, really go deep into mechanism of love, experience of love, practice of love. These are, we give us problems for our PhD students.
So you've
So
actually developed a theory on love?
yes,
That is amazing.
we have from the basics, whatever you are about love, whatever your problem is, we more or less can guide you through how to find love at a much better place. Of course, discovering unconditional love, that takes longer commitment and longer time. But being in a very good place in romantic love is actually teachable quite easily. I mean,
Really?
we can.
Wow. Is that you gonna write a book on that? Have you written a book on that yet?
We are in the process of
In the
writing.
works, baby. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's gonna be a bestseller for sure. You definitely gotta come back on and talk about that with me for sure.
I hope so. Yes, I mean, this is one of the things that we really can, here again there are obstacles, and we can see them as opportunities. And as we transform our view, our belief system, we can work with it. And if we have a good partner, then it's very easy and fun. Of course, if we don't have a partner, if we have to find one, then we have to proceed a little bit in the dark until we find a partner who will be committed. But by that time, it will grow a little bit. So, what my experience was that when I was this ignoramus about relationship, it was very hard to find someone who will get committed with me. But I was lucky. I found a woman in America, American woman, and she actually was instrumental in how I discovered about love. So for me, it worked out. you have to find someone. And this love research you cannot do by yourself, not very far. You can do a little bit. Self-love is important, and you can do that, you can learn that, and indeed that's a spiritual practice. It's called bhakti yoga. You can do that, but that does not really show you well, it does and doesn't. I mean, my experience was that it does a little bit. It shows you how to surrender your ego in certain situation, but not in the intricacies of the world. It does not really tell you relationship. And what we need in the world to get by is relationship. So this going into love and manifest love in your life, this is the kind of manifestation that movement of consciousness loves.
Mhm.
Anyone who is exploring love can absolutely be sure that God will be on your side for this exploration. Absolutely no questions asked. So manifest love in your life, how to do it. And I went through all the steps that I myself theorized, and I can say truly everything works. What quantum science says, it really works.
Oh,
Yeah,
I've
so
absolutely loved this conversation.
perfect. She and I are writing this book.
I definitely am getting that book for sure. Um, how can people connect with you and find your book? Is there a
Um,
website?
Yes, my website, Amit Goswami, AmitGoswami.org, amitgoswami.org, and under which there is a column called book, and you can get that. All the books are listed there, as well as about the university that I spoke about, Quantum Activism Vishalayam. Vishalayam means, it's a Sanskrit word, home of the world. And it is really home of the world. It's an international university. We already have started it. We are we are 1 year now in operation, and I'm very excited about it because we really can teach this thing finally. You know.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I'm excited for you. I'm excited to look at the research. I'm excited to look at your website and learn more. I just think that you're doing great work, and I'm excited to follow you. Last question. It's kind of tough. What do you want your legacy to be?
Excuse me.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, actually, I don't really believe much in personal legacies, but this transformative education, science of consciousness, this I think is the future of humanity. It has to be, because there is also the question of where is humanity going?
Mm,
Is it going to be ending in the chaos that we are seeing right now in the United States, or is it going to be better? I think we have a very bright future. Scientists have to come out of their prejudice about matter being everything. That is basic. But I think we are going towards that. You know, this election is a very telling thing. I mean, look at Biden. Everybody knows he's not particularly charismatic. And there is Trump, who is very charismatic indeed. A lot of power, lot of creativity. No question that Trump is an exceptional leader, and yet he is based in hate. Whereas Biden, on the other hand, is based on religion, spirituality. Christianity is not a very limited religion. It's really in the basic core, it's an excellent religion.
mm,
It has some prejudices, agreed. Scientists hate it for that reason. But it also has some wonderful teachings in the form of Jesus's teaching. And people who become decent, they really practice parts of it. And I feel, I have never met Joe Biden, but I feel from what he represents, what I read about him, this is a decent man and really a spiritual man, somewhat of a transformed person. And we are electing him, and we are in the process of electing him. This is a fantastic change in the country, coming from somebody who is autocratic, who is, although charismatic, but autocratic and chaos producing, to somebody who is boring, but a decent person, is a tremendous shift for the country. And this is good. So if materialism can come out of its matter bias and start looking into consciousness, we already have. Transpersonal psychology, we already have. Religions in good place. And if the religious people can come out of their dogma, which is also as ridiculous as the scientific dogma, people like Falwell, and then the two sides can meet, and we can have a humanity going forward again. And this is where quantum science of consciousness will be of major help. So that will be my legacy, if you
Mm.
want to my legacy, because in science we don't believe in personal legacy. I mean, Einstein did great things, Newton did great things, but we don't say physics is Newton's physics or physics is Einstein's physics. We just say physics. And that's the way it should be.
Sure. No, I'm really a big fan of transpersonal psychology. Like I'm looking now at different departments of like good schools to go to, and there's not a lot of them, with those programs. It's
At
pretty.
our program, so you might be very, very impressed by what we are offering. It is a sort of transpersonal psychology in a scientific way.
So yeah. So where do I find out more? Just go to your website and follow the
Go
links.
to the website and QAV, or even better, I will ask my assistant to mail something to you.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I would appreciate that. Thank you so
Right?
much. This has been amazing. Like I love talking to you. You've been a big inspiration for me as far as expanding my consciousness and firing me up to connect with that oneness. So thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you, Trey, for inviting me. Right.